Hey everyone, this is Chris Bennett, your blockchain beard guy. Continuing from our last video on Hyperledger solutions and how you can get hands-on with a real-life Hyperledger solution. If you didn't get to see the first video, I'll include a link in the description to this one. Go ahead and check it out and get up to speed. But I want to pick up where we left off last time by talking about the components of a Hyperledger solution before we dive in and actually get hands-on with one you can play with yourself in Hyperledger's Composer Playground. When you're defining any Hyperledger solution, it's important to understand three different classes of objects: participants, assets, and transactions. When we talk about participants, we're simply talking about who are the actors in this solution space. These are usually either human beings, organizations, or other line of business systems. Essentially, the participants are any of the actors in a solution who can perform transactions against the assets. When we talk about assets, we're actually talking about the things that matter, the things of value. What are the things we want this solution to track? Assets are the objects that actors interact with. When we define assets, it's important that we understand all the properties and attributes of those assets that matter or that we want to keep track of. And it's important to understand that assets have a finite life cycle, usually. In a Hyperledger solution, assets are stored in mutable data storage, meaning unlike what we store on the actual blockchain, the assets themselves can be edited, they can be deleted. They more or less, most often, have a finite life cycle. So if we use a Hyperledger solution to track the life cycle of a vehicle, that asset may begin its life cycle on the factory floor when that car is being assembled. That asset may end its life when it goes to the scrapyard or the crusher. And that asset will no longer exist once the end of its life has occurred. We won't track it. We won't store data about the asset itself directly. But what lives on the blockchain, immutably and forever, are transactions. Transactions are simply a recording of the interaction between participants and assets. Most often, when we record a transaction, we're recording how a certain property or attribute of an asset has been changed or updated by one or more participants. So again, in our vehicle lifecycle example, transactions might be tracking the sale of a car from one owner to another. We might track if a car got service done, parts modified, etc. And unlike the assets, which have a finite life cycle, transactions are permanent. So after that car goes to the scrapyard or to the crusher, we may not continue to list it and track it as an asset, but the data that we'll have that lives on permanently is everything that happened to that particular asset over the course of its life cycle. So in the example we're going to look at a car auction network. And these are the participants, the assets, and the transactions that we're going to track in this demo solution. Our participants are simple. We have an auctioneer and a member, and for the purposes of this demo, we're only really going to focus on the member. We're not going to worry too much about the auctioneer, what they do, or how they participate in this solution. Some important properties that we're tracking about members. We're tracking their email address because we're using that as the primary identifier for a participant. And we're also tracking the balance, the amount of money they have when they enter this auction. The assets in this solution are the vehicle that we're auctioning off. And the vehicle has a property, the current owner of the vehicle, which is simply just a link back to one individual member, one participant. The second asset that we're tracking is the vehicle sale listing. And the primary property or attribute that we're interested in there is the reserve price of the vehicle. And then finally, we have two different transactions in our solution. We have an offer transaction where a member can place a bid on a vehicle listed in a vehicle listing. We also have the closed bidding transaction that the auctioneer can call. Closed bidding simply changes the status of a vehicle listing, indicates that it's no longer for sale. And if any offer has been made on that vehicle which exceeds the reserve price, then the highest offer to exceed the reserve price will indicate the owner that that vehicle now gets associated with. In other words, if you place the highest bid on a vehicle and it was above the reserve price, once the closed bidding transaction gets called, the owner property of the vehicle will be updated to you. So let's go ahead and let's jump into this solution. This is the Car Auction Network solution, and you can check this out yourself by going to composer-playground.mybluemix.net. Composer Playground is simply an easy way that you can get hands-on with Hyperledger Composer and try it out yourself. So let's go ahead and start playing with blockchain here on Composer Playground. We're going to deploy a new business network. And when you deploy a new business network, there are some samples that you can choose from to help you get started. One of those is the Car Auction Network, and we're going to go ahead and select that one. We can update any properties, such as a name, description, etc., about our solution. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to accept the defaults, and I'm going to go ahead and deploy my solution. My solution has been deployed, and I see it listed here under My Business Networks. I can connect into it. And if I click on the Test tab here, you're going to see, just like we talked about, I have my participants, the auctioneer and the member. I have my assets, the vehicle and the vehicle listing. And I have my transactions. And if I want to submit a transaction, I can choose between making an offer and close bidding. So let's go ahead and let's create some assets, participants in this solution, and then we'll let them interact through transactions. As I mentioned, we're not going to worry too much about the auctioneer. What I really want to focus on are the members. So I'm going to click on Member, and let's go ahead and create a new participant. When I create a participant, all I'm doing is simply filling out a JSON object that gives me the information I want to track about that participant. So let's say our first participant is Alice Johnson. She has an email of alice@abc.com, and she has an initial balance of $10,000. I'm going to go ahead and create this new participant. And we can see there's Alice. And of course, we can't have any example of Alice without having Bob involved. So now we have Bob Smith. We're going to give Bob an email, also at abc.com. And let's also give Bob an initial balance of $10,000. So now you can see we have our two participants. Let's go ahead and add a vehicle into the mix. We're going to give this vehicle a VIN number of 1234. And we're going to say the owner of this vehicle is Alice at abc.com. Now we've got a vehicle listed. Finally, let's create an auction listing for this vehicle. Let's give this listing ID 9876. Let's say the reserve price for our vehicle is $5,000. We'll say we're selling a 1984 Toyota Camry. This vehicle has an initial state of for sale, and we're going to leave that alone. Once we close the bidding, this vehicle will no longer be for sale, and you see our solution update that. And then we want to sell or list the vehicle with VIN number 1234. Now we're ready to go ahead and start placing transactions against our vehicle. So as you can see, it's very easy to start describing your participants, your assets, and to perform transactions on them. Because we're limited to 10 minutes on a video here on LinkedIn, we'll have to pause it right here. When we come back tomorrow, we'll actually try out this demo. We'll place some bids, we'll close the auction, and we'll see this 1984 Toyota Camry assume a new owner. Until next time, I'm Chris Bennett, your blockchain beard guy. Hope you join us tomorrow to see the rest of our hands-on with Hyperledger demo.